My name is Aubrey, and I am Miami Church.
Mi nombre es George Santana.
I am Ajay Williams.
Mi nombre es María.
I'm Paul.
Bonjour, je m'appelle Allegra.
Mi nombre es Mark Herrera.
My name is Haley, and I am Miami Church.
Et je suis Miami Church.
I'm Will, and I'm Miami Church.
Nama saya Carmen. Saya adalah Miami Church.
My name is Kevin Sparrow, and I am Miami Church.
Je m'appelle Arnaud et je suis Miami Church.
I'm Carolina and I'm Miami Church.
Meu nome é Hudson e eu sou Miami Church.
My name is Crystal Guico, and I am Miami Church.
Yo soy Miami Church.
We are Miami Church.
And I am Miami Church.
And I am Miami Church.
And I am Miami Church.
Now, I grew up in church. This is actually the church, not this painting, or it's not a painting, it's a drawing. I attended a church growing up as a kid. This is a picture of it that one of my mentors actually did. It's a little church outside of Atlanta, Georgia. And I was here basically from the time I was born until I left for college at around the age of 17. And this place, right, this place shaped my view of faith. It shaped my view of Jesus. It shaped my view of God and church for good and bad, right and wrong. There's a lot of good people in this place. There was a lot of good things done in this place. There was also some crazy stuff done in this place. But my experience, my view, my perspective of church was shaped by this place. What was your first experience with church? How many of you, it was sometime when you were a kid, like you were a young kid and there was this experience that you had? Right? How many maybe older, like college or beyond, that was your first experience? How many of you are not participating at all in what I'm trying to do here? That's great. Thank you so much. Glad you're here. Can we get, never mind, security. You know, but the reality is, right, something, right? Think about your first experience. Maybe you were a kid, maybe you're in college, maybe you were an adult. But what was your experience? Some building somewhere, some church somewhere. And the reality is that experience, right, what you experienced as a kid or what you experienced even later in life shapes your view of faith. It shapes your view of God. It shapes your view of Jesus and the church. And here's what I want to do today for a few minutes. Here's my goal. This is where we're trying to go. Today is I want to go back to the beginning. Okay? I want to go back to the original idea of church. Like, this is great. Right? And I had some good experiences here, and I could take you to that building now. But I want to go back to what was the original idea? Like when the idea of church was originally created, what was the idea and what was it meant to be? Because what I really believe, right, and some of you are going to think I'm crazy, what I really believe is that you should go all in with church. Like you should give everything. You should give your life, your time, your resources, everything you have. You should go all in with church, not this church in this picture, but the original idea of church. And so whether you're new and you're like, okay, maybe for the first time I can understand what church is all about. Maybe you were burned somewhere and you had a bad experience and were hurt. And I'm sorry that happened, but maybe it's just a fresh perspective that you need today. But today I want to look at the idea of what is church, the original idea. And to start this, we're going to have to kind of go on a journey for a minute. And I'm going to take you back to this dry and dusty road thousands of years ago. And there was a guy named Matthew. Matthew was a tax collector. He was a guy they're really kind of mean people that would take your money. And he became a follower of Jesus. And he wrote this down. He was an eyewitness to this, and he wrote this down. And so here's the scene. There's Jesus and his followers, right? There's 13 of them total. And they're walking on a dry and dusty road, and they're walking toward a city called Caesarea Philippi. And there's a picture of it. You can see from the picture, if you were to travel there today, there's not a lot there unless you're like into rocks and dirt and stuff, but there's just not a lot to do there. And so they're on this road toward this city, and this city, Caesarea Philippi, was named after a Roman emperor by the name of Caesar Augustus. And if any of you know Roman history, that he was the adoptive son of Julius Caesar. And Julius Caesar was a god to them in that culture. And so you can imagine Jesus and his 12 guys are walking toward the city. It's a hot, dry day. They're cruising down this dirt, rocky road. And all of a sudden, they're having this conversation probably about Caesar Augustus and all this thing. And all of a sudden, Jesus turns to them. It's like he stops. And they're like, why are we stopping here? And he looks at them and he says a question. He asks them a question. It's kind of a famous question. And he says this. Who do you say I am? Like, who do you think I am? There was one of them in particular that was kind of a loudmouth. He was kind of an outspoken guy, you know, people who say it before they think it. And he responded this. He said, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. You can see in context why he would say that. Like, this city, Caesarea Philippi, is named after the son of a dead God. Julius Caesar is dead. But you are the Son of the living God. And then they're standing there now in this middle of nowhere on this dusty path. And Jesus says something now that this is amazing. You gotta get this. He makes a prediction. He says something that's so astounding and so crazy. I can't even overstate what he says here. This is what he says. And on this rock, I will build my church. And on this rock, I will build my church. Now, the word rock here is very interesting. People have different perspectives on what the rock means. Catholics are going to say, well, the rock means Peter because he's the one that made the declaration. And the Protestants are going to say, no, the rock is the declaration that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of the living God. That's a fun conversation. But what I really want you to see today is this. Jesus says, I will build my church. He's making this bold claim. I mean, he's making this huge, think about this for a minute, okay? In context, they're in the middle of nowhere. They're on a dry and dusty road headed toward this city. There's 13 of them. There's Jesus and Judas, just to kind of balance things out, right? They're in the middle of nowhere, 150 miles north of Jerusalem. And Jesus is like, hey guys, I'm going to build my church. And they're going like, what are you even talking about? There's not even like Chick-fil-A or Popeyes. We can't even argue over which chicken sandwich is better here. I mean, there's nothing. We're in the middle of nowhere. It's like starting a surfing team in Kansas. Like, you can't do this, Jesus. There's nothing here. But here's what's interesting. Jesus, when he was walking the earth, he spoke in Aramaic. But when it was recorded, when Matthew wrote it down, they wrote it in Greek. And so when he was recording the story, he wrote it in Greek. And in Greek, he says, I will build my... And here's the word. This is the Greek word. It's a word called ecclesia. And this little Greek word is really clear in the Greek language. It means gathering or assembly. This is what it means. It means a gathering or an assembly. And the idea behind this word in the original language is this is the idea of gather to go or assembled, like come together in order to go. And so this deal is what Jesus is saying here when he said this. When he said, I will build my church, what he's really saying is, I will build my gathering. And he's making this prediction. He's predicting a gathering. He's predicting this idea of a movement. We're moving. And so these guys are standing here in the middle of nowhere, on this dusty, hot day. And he goes, guys, we're getting ready to start a movement. We're gonna start a movement of people, and this thing is gonna go. It's gonna be a movement, guys. And they're like, yeah, okay, right, Jesus. But here's what happened, okay? Over time, many of you know that what was recorded in Greek began to be translated into different languages. And it was translated in different languages. And something happened that was really, really terrible in history. As time went on, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, these guys wrote this down in Greek. It didn't get translated ecclesia, which is the Greek word, but it got translated something different. And it got translated into this word, which was, it's a German word. And you can see the English derivative of this is church, right? And this word, which was translated in about 300 years later, in 300 AD, this word literally means house of the Lord. This is the idea of like an organized religion, a church building, a place. And what happened here in this translation is there was a shift in the idea, the shift from what Jesus said, I will build my gathering, I will build a movement, to this shift of, hey, the house of the Lord, I will build a house of the Lord, or I'll build an organized religion. There was a shift that happened, and it went from the idea of a movement to a location. It went from the idea of a people to this actual idea of a place. And what's crazy about all this is this little linguistic change that happened from ecclesia, gathering assembly, which is very clear in the original language. What happened there, and what's so crazy about this, is it affects the way that you and I view church now. Like this little linguistic change has an impact on your view, on your perspective of church. Jesus did not predict a place, he predicted a people. He didn't predict a building, he predicted a movement. I will build my ecclesia. Now, one of my favorite stories in all of this that I love to tell is about a guy named William Tyndale. And William Tyndale, he came along in the 1500s. And this guy, he doesn't look like much, but he was actually a scholar. And he spoke 7 languages, and he was fluent in Hebrew and Greek. And what happened is, and this has probably happened to you at some point, William Tyndale was reading the New Testament of the Bible, the second part of the Bible, and he was reading it in Greek. So he's reading it in the original language. And as he's reading it, he has one of those aha moments. You know what I'm talking about? One of those moments you're like, oh. And he read it, and he goes, what I'm reading and what I'm experiencing when I'm part of a church are different. And so William Tyndale decided right then and there, he says, I'm going to give my life, this is my passion of my life, is I'm going to translate the Greek New Testament, I'm going to translate it into English so that English-speaking people can have a copy of the New Testament. And so he gave his life to that. And you can imagine this was not popular with the church leaders of the day. The cardinals and the pope and the priests, they were not having it. In fact, Tyndale had to flee for his life. He actually ended up in Germany, but it didn't stop him. He kept translating from Greek into English, and thanks to the Gutenberg press, he was able to get a copy of the Greek New Testament into English. Now, he was actually branded a heretic and killed, but it was too late. He had already gotten it out, and it was too late, and the church that had control, because they controlled the language in the Bible, was beginning to lose its power. And here's what's interesting. When Tyndale came to this text, right, when he came to this scene where Jesus is walking this dry and dusty road with his disciples, and he makes this prediction, I will build, Tyndale, in his translation from Greek to English, he wrote the word gathering. He said, I will build my gathering. And it was his attempt to return the church back to the original idea of what Jesus, not what it had become, but he was trying to return the church back to the original idea. And what's crazy is here we are in Miami in 2019, right? We're talking about stuff thousands of years ago. But that stuff completely affects the way that you and I view the idea of church. In fact, several years ago, my wife and I were trying to help start this church, right? And so we're trying to help start this church, which is now called Miami Church. And I remember meeting people. We'd be out and about. We'd be meeting parents of my kids, friends, and all this. And I would say, hey, yeah, we're helping start a church, and I'm a pastor. And they would say, where's your building? First question, where's your building? And it was this sense, they didn't say it to me, but it was almost this sense like, well, you're not a legitimate pastor because you don't have a building. Jesus said, no. I'm not predicting a building. I'm not predicting a place. I'm predicting a people. I'm predicting a movement. You know, when I was a kid, get it right side up for you. When I was a kid here, right? That's all I knew, right? This is where we went. This is what my parents did. This is what my friends did. This was church. Like church was contained right here in this brick and mortar. We would say things, again, little subtle things, right? What would we say? Hey, man, this was like a rallying point. Hey, man, I'll meet you over at church. Or like, hey, are you going to be at church on Sunday? Like, no. Subtle little things. Jesus said, no, I didn't predict a building. There's nothing wrong with buildings, but I didn't predict a building or a location. I predicted a people and a movement. It's why we do little subtle things here at Miami Church. It's just our attempt, right? We call this place, right? We don't call this Miami Church. I don't like, hey, I'll see you at Miami Church. We call this 2150, right? We call this, right, when we get together, a lot of churches call it a service. I don't even know what that means, right? That's just an old word that got made up somewhere in history. We say, hey, no, the 9:30 gathering or the 11:15 gathering. Why? It's our small attempt to say, hey, no, this is the actual meaning of what Jesus said when he said, I will build my gathering. I will build my church. Now, I want to just trace this with you real quick and kind of show you where I'm going to go. So here they are, right? They're on this dusty, dry road to Caesarea Philippi, right? And he makes this prediction, I will build my church, right? And then right after that, they head back to Jerusalem. And you guys know the story. I'll give the punchline. Jesus gets arrested. They have this fake trial. And then what happens? They put him on a cross, right? And he's dead, right? So Friday, they throw him on the cross, right? This is the thing we talk about at Easter time, right? What happened? When Jesus was on that cross on Friday and even the following day, Saturday, when he's what happened? The movement died. Like all of this, I'm going to build my church and we're going to create this movement and it's going to be this people and we're going viral here, guys. When he was making those predictions, when he was on the cross, okay, it all died. All of the followers, they ran, they fled, they hid, they got out of there because they're thinking, if you can get to Jesus, you can sure as heck get to me. I'm getting out of here. And so the movement died. But here's what's fascinating in history is the movement was dead, but all of a sudden, a few days later, all of those men and all of those women who ran and hid and ran for their life and took cover, all of a sudden, those men and women become the first people to jump in with this idea of building a movement, a gathering. Because what happened was these men and women saw Jesus on Friday on a cross. They saw Jesus in a tomb. But then on Sunday, they saw him alive. And they had breakfast with this guy. And by the way, if someone dies and predicts their death and then comes back to life, you probably should listen to what they say. So all of a sudden they see this guy and he's alive and all of a sudden it clicks in their head. You are who you say you are. Like it was cute and all, like to claim to be the Son of God and like, ooh, that's cool. But now that you've actually died and come back to life and we've seen it and I've touched you with my hands, then all of a sudden this is real. And this whole idea of I will build my church becomes really real. And so he gathers them together. There's about 120 of them. And they get all together, and there's this moment where he gives them like the start. It's just like there's this big, huge green button, and he's like, all right, guys, we're getting ready to hit the green button on the church, and when I slam this button, it's go, right? And he says this, and you know these famous words from Matthew 28. He says, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. And here's the key word. Look at 19. Therefore, go. Right? This is the start. I mean, it's like, poof, let's go, guys. Therefore, go and do what? Make disciples. Tell other people about me. Help people become followers of Jesus. Help people know that there's this relentless and reckless love that's going on. Guys, we got to go. We got to go. He says, go and make disciples of who? Everybody. Don't stop. Everybody. Baptizing. There's the thing Kiki just talked about, like helping people understand that to be baptized, they go public with their faith. Baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son of the Holy Spirit and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. And he says, surely I'm with you always, even until the end of the earth. And so at this moment, right, he made that prediction, right, on a dusty road. But this was that moment where it was like, all right, guys, I died, I'm alive, let's go. And so the movement was born. It began growing, but if you study the story over time, it became stuck. It became a little too us. You know, well, we're comfortable, we're good. I like these people. It became a little too stuck. And I can just imagine, again, this isn't in the Bible, I'm making this up, but I can just imagine there's this conversation going on in heaven, right? And I don't know why we do this, but when we have these conversations about heaven, I always look down, like who I'm talking down, but I don't know. But anyway, it's like this conversation, and God is up there, and he's looking out, and he's like, oh, man, we just got this movement going, and it's stuck. It's not going anywhere. Jesus, get over here, Jesus. Look at this. Like these dudes, these guys that obviously Judas, that was a miss, but these other guys, they're not really doing what you said. You said go, help everybody know about our love, but they're missing it. Like, We need somebody. We just need somebody. We need an engine. We need a go-getter. We need a type A personality, double type A. We need somebody who's going to risk and drive it. And it's somebody that's just willing not to take no for an answer. Somebody that's just bulldoze through whatever needs to be done. We need somebody. How about this guy over here? Look, it's Saul of Tarsus. Now, if you know anything about Saul of Tarsus, Saul was a guy who was actually trying to destroy the church. He was a guy that was trying to kill and persecute those who were followers. At that time, it was called followers of the way. And I could just imagine this conversation going like, Saul of Tarsus? I mean, he's not even on our team. He's on the other team. I mean, he's their star player. He's putting up points against us. He's hurting us. Exactly. And Paul tells his Saul, by the way, he has this encounter with Jesus. He becomes known as Paul. And he tells the story. In fact, you should read it later on today. It's in what's called Acts chapter 9. And he tells this story of how he goes from one that's like persecuting and destroying the church to actually someone who gives his life. You talk about the idea of all in. I mean, he goes all in. He gives everything he has to help start the church. But not this church, not this. He didn't build any buildings. He wanted to start the movement, the people, the place. And so Paul spends 30 years. I mean, he gets persecuted. He gets rocks thrown at him. He gets run out of town. He gets sweat, blood, tears. I mean, he gives it all for 30 years. And he helps start these churches, these gatherings, these movements, these Jesus movements all over the known world. And he gives everything he's got to do that. And you fast forward, right? You fast forward to the end of his life. Okay, Paul is now 63 years old, okay? And by the way, Paul wrote all this down in the letters, which came about 25 years after the resurrection, the death and resurrection, when there was eyewitnesses around. And he wrote all this down, and so we get to the end of his life. He's 63 years old, and he's in prison. In fact, there's a picture of his prison. This is in Rome, and Paul was in this prison at the end of his life. And he had a trial, and basically he was sentenced to death. They were going to kill him. And can you imagine Paul? Here's a 63-year-old man who gave everything he had. He went from like destroying and killing and persecuting to actually starting. And if you read this, I mean, it's just, he pours his whole life into it. And here he is. He's 63 years old, and he's inside this prison, and he's getting ready to die. Now, none of us know how our life is going to end, but if you have the luxury at the end of your life to have a little time, like to think, like if you're coherent enough and can actually think, what are you going to think about? Right? I mean, you're going to ask the basic questions like, well, how was my life? Like, did it matter? Is there did I make a difference? I mean, did I help anybody? Was there, like, what happened with my life? And so here's Paul. He knows there's like a date, right? Execution date. 24 hours. He's got to be sitting in this prison going like, oh, did this work? I mean, all the hardships and the running for my life, and I wrote all these crazy letters, and I got on all these boats, and I shipwrecked, and I gave and I sacrificed, and I would stand up and try to teach people. Is anybody even listening to what I'm trying to say here? Did any of this work? And what would be interesting is if you could go to that exact moment in history, right? If we could literally travel in time, if the flux capacitor was really real, and that was of Marty McFly, and we could actually go, well, no one gets that. Come on, you guys, come, please. Come on. No one knows Huey Lewis in the News? Oh, thank you. Yeah, 2 people. You guys need to read something. Okay, and if you could actually go back in time, right? If you could actually travel in time, and you could go to that moment, that exact moment, where Paul is getting ready to be executed, right? And he's in this prison. I've actually been there. I've traveled to Rome and seen this. And there's like this little stairwell that goes down. There's like one of those little old gates, like, right? And the gate opens, and you can just hear the Roman guard walking to his prison, saying, all right, Paul, it's time. And they're going to take him from this prison right here in the heart of Rome, and they're going to walk him about 10 or 15 minutes out to the edge of town. And they're going to, at that point, he's going to die. He knows it's over. There's no more appeals. There's nothing else he can do. They're going to separate his head and his body. It's over. And I just imagine this scene, right? The Roman guard grabs Paul, and if you could just like go there and like stand beside Paul, like if you could just like walk through the city of Rome with Paul, And he's going to walk, and you can see here there's a picture of the Roman Forum. He's going to walk right down past all of these great. If you could go, Paul, listen, all that you did, all that you gave, all that you did, it worked. It worked. Don't be discouraged, Paul. I know you're going to die. I know this is the end. But listen, Paul, it worked. And you could start going like, hey, Paul, look around, right? And he's looking around. And this is like the greatest city in the world at the time. This is the Roman Empire. I mean, Rome was the greatest city in the world. And you could look around and go, Paul, look around. You see all of this? And right now there's all of these pagan gods, and there's Roman gods and Greek gods and all of these gods. But guess what, Paul? One day, this city will have more crosses in it than any other city in the world. There'll be crosses on top of all of these buildings that aren't even built yet. They'll have crosses. And those crosses, Paul, won't have anything to do with the means of crucifixion. Those crosses will all point to one single crucifixion, and that's of Jesus, the guy that you've been trying to rep for all of these years. Can you believe that, Paul? Paul's like, man, it's okay, I can't. And you keep walking. Like, Paul, this is the end. Look over here, Paul. You see this? This is Nero's circus. Anybody know what Nero's circus is? This is a place where the Emperor Nero would just persecute believers, those who were followers of Jesus. And they would throw them to the lions, and this is where they put tar on them and light them on fire. And this is where all kinds of gross and horrible things would happen to people who claimed to be followers of Jesus. You go, Paul, you see this? I mean, this is a place of persecution. In fact, Peter, your friend Peter, will one day be crucified at Nero's circus. In fact, tradition tells us he was crucified upside down with his head down. That's going to happen right here. But guess what? One day, Paul, you may not believe this, on that spot right there will be one of the most beautiful buildings in the world, and it's actually going to be named for your friend Peter. Right there. And people will travel from all over the world, millions of people from all over the world, to see this place. Can you believe that, Paul? Can you believe that's going to happen? And could you imagine, right, that Paul is walking with you. Now you're getting about 5 minutes from where he's going to die. Like, Paul, this is the end. But I just want you to know, one day, you can't imagine this, Paul, but one day the Roman Empire will only exist in history books. I mean, people will read about emperors and this and that, and there'll be some great stories in history. But guess what? Churches, these gatherings, these movements of people that you helped start, guess what? They will be all over the world, and there'll be a church in every major city in the world. Can you imagine that, Paul? No way. And then Paul, last thing. Listen, you gave everything you had, and you poured your heart into building churches and gatherings and movements, and you wrote these letters. You tried to give instructions to the church. You would spend just hours and hours and days and weeks just writing and pouring your soul and your heart into these letters, and then you would hand it to some young punk that worked for the Pony Express, and he was supposed to take it to some church in Ephesus or some church in Thessalonica or some church in Corinth, and you probably handed it to him wondering if it would ever get there. But guess what? Those letters that you wrote, that you poured your heart and soul, guess what? They're all over the world. They've been translated in over 1,200 languages. It's the best-selling book of all time. It will always be the best-selling all-time. Paul, everything you did, it worked. I mean, could Paul have imagined this? I mean, here he is, right? This great Roman Empire. All that he gave, he didn't see all the fruit of it. He didn't see all the results. Could he have imagined that there'd be no Roman Empire, but yet churches all over the world? Could he imagine that the city of Rome would be adorned with crosses? Could he have imagined any of this? I don't think so. But guess what? It happened. It happened just like Jesus said it would. He said on a dry and dusty road in the middle of nowhere, that was written down by a couple of guys in Greek language. He said, hey guys, I'm going to build my church. I'm going to build a movement. I'm going to build a movement of people. And guess what? The gates of hell will not prevail against it. I'm making a promise. I'm making a prediction. I'm going all in here. I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. And the church the church, not this. I mean, that's a great building. You know what this is now? It's a community college. They sold it to a community college. I'll build my church, not this. My movement, my gathering, my people. The gates of hell can't stop it. That church, that movement, that people, that will be the epicenter of my work, of God's activity in the world. Because the church is a vehicle which God's greatest message of hope and love and grace is contained in. He says it's going to change the world. In this prediction that he made that had to sound crazy and outlandish to these followers in the middle of nowhere. And here we are, right? 2,000 years later. Roman Empire is only in history books. But the church is going strong and it's still moving. Jesus predicted there would be an assembly, a gathering of imperfect people like you and me, whose faith in the resurrected Jesus would move us to embrace a lifestyle of grace and forgiveness and kindness. And this bold prediction in the middle of nowhere, I will build my church. It can't be stopped. I mean, Christians have tried to, right? I mean, there's churches and Christians have done so many stupid things throughout history. There's been persecution. There's been attacks. People have tried to destroy the church. Churches have tried to add to it. Well, Jesus said this, but we're going to add 3 or 4 more steps to it because that would kind of be cool, right? And some of you have been burned by that. Churches have tried to add to what Jesus said, right? Yet, in spite of all of that, in spite of all the stupidity and all the attacks and all of the things, the church is still here. Here we are. It's still going. It's still moving. It's still transforming lives. And Jesus' prediction is, I will build my church and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. I could quit right now. I could walk out that door and never look back. Right? I'd be gone. And I think God would grieve God's heart because he loves me. He said, Greg, man, that's not my plan for you. I'm sorry. But guess what? Church don't stop. Can't stop it. There's no way to stop it. I will build my church and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. And here's the greatest part, is that you and I have been invited. We have been invited to be part of it. We've been invited to go all in. And that's why we're calling this all in. It's why we started this church. It's why our mission is to help your friends and your neighbors and your loved ones know about this loving and great God. This is why we're saying all in. And so here's where we're going over the next few weeks is we're really going to say, what's the step that you need to take? What's your next step? What's your next? If Jesus said, hey, this is the greatest thing that's ever been created, and you have an opportunity, and I have an opportunity to be part of it, what's the next step you need to take? And for some of you, your next step is you need to do what Kiki talked about a few minutes ago. You need to say, you know what? I've been trying all this on my own, and I'm doing this whatever cycle it is, and you can name whatever that is, but man, I'm done. And I need to say, I'm done. I surrender. I give my life to you. And you need to turn from going your way and confess all your wrongdoings and sins and turn toward God and say, God, I want to be all in with you. Some of you, you're like Kiki was. He turned a minute ago. You're sitting out there. You're like, man, I'm there. But you're holding back. Something's holding you back. And you need to go all in and you need to be baptized. You need to say, I'm in. September 21, let's go. I'm ready to go public with my faith. I'm ready to be part of the movement. I'm ready to be part of what's happening. Some of you, you're holding back. You need to serve. You need to serve. You got so much talent and gifts. You need to give those gifts to the church. These people up here that are just giving their gifts. You need to serve, and whether that's in kids or greeting people or doing stuff around it, you need to serve. Some of you need to get part of a neighborhood team, and some of you need to give. Like, oh, don't talk about giving. Oh, every church. You know what Jesus talks about giving? He talks about giving more than he talks about heaven and hell, by the way. You know why Jesus talks about giving? Jesus doesn't need your money, okay? Please, give me $10. No, Jesus doesn't need your money. But you know what he says? He says, where your money is, where your stuff is, that's where your heart is. Jesus says, you know what? I want you to be all in. And I want you to be all in. And part of being all in is you need to get, you're holding on, man. You got a death grip. Whatever it is you got a death grip on, whether it's money or some kind of possession, he's saying you need to give. So the reason I think you need to give and be generous to our church is because you need to go all in. And Jesus said, hey, whatever your next step, you need to serve, you need to give, you need to be baptized, whatever it is, I'm praying that you will take your next step. So will you just pray with me?
Thanks so much for tuning in. We hope it brought you encouragement and hope for the rest of the day. If you have any questions or want to talk to someone, click the link in our bio and contact us at hello@miamichurch.com. And if you want to support what God's doing here at Miami Church, feel free to go to miamichurch.churchcenter.com/giving. And finally, if you haven't subscribed, go ahead and do that. We love you and hope you have a great day.